On everybody, it is your boy Zamboni. I'm an herbalist and astrologer, and it is time to talk about the astrology of the week ahead. Thank you so much for being here. I super appreciate all of y'all. Y'all are the real ones. Y'all are on the email list. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sending me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. Thank you for just being a part of this community. Thank you for joining the membership. And y'all are the ones that interact deeply with what I'm talking about. You think about it, you comment something. I super appreciate all that. Thank you for being here. Let's talk about the astrology of the week ahead. So, this week, there's actually not very much action going on. Basically what we have is we have stuff in Aries. We got Mars and Jupiter in Aries. And we've got stuff in Taurus, we've got Venus and Uranus in Taurus, and then we've got stuff in Gemini, and we've got the sun in Gemini, basically. And that's where stuff is. You know, we've still got Saturn in Aquarius, that's still happening, so we still got Saturn, Uranus, and we'll talk about that. But because the sun has already moved past aspect to Mars and Jupiter, the sun in Gemini has moved past aspect to Mars and Jupiter in Aries, and adjacent signs, so Gemini and Aries, which are adjacent to Taurus, don't make an aspect to adjacent signs. Adjacent signs don't make aspect to adjacent signs. That is to say that Aries doesn't make an aspect to Taurus. Gemini doesn't make an aspect to Taurus. So we're sort of past most of the action for a little while because Mercury is gonna still be in Taurus this week. Mercury's been retrograde, started retrograde in Gemini, went back into Taurus, stationed direct last week, square to Saturn in Aquarius and conjunct the North Node. Mercury hasn't gotten back up to speed and so is pretty slow still and just gonna hang out at the end of Taurus. Isn't gonna change signs back into Gemini for a little time now. And so there's not that much happening here. The main event here that is going on is we've got Saturn stationing retrograde, right? And so if I'm talking about Saturn stationing retrograde, then there's really not that much action going on. I mostly don't mention the retrograde stations just because they're like kind of normal, except for Mercury and Venus and Mars. But like outer planets, they like kind of don't matter that much. But Saturn is stationing retrograde this week. And Saturn in Aquarius is square to Uranus and Taurus. That's important because that is ongoing. That is continuously happening for at least this 2-year stretch of time that we're currently in right now. So it's been going on for about a year and change. We've got until March 2023 when Saturn moves out of Aquarius. So we're still going to be doing Saturn-Uranus dynamics for that period of time. So this week, what we're going to see is the main event this week. The main thing that we're going to look at is Venus making a conjunction to Uranus in Taurus. This is very important because we've been looking at the Saturn-Uranus square for a long time. I've been thinking about how there can be pressure, there can be difficulty. Saturn in Aquarius has been speaking to the kind of like new world order, as it were. You know what I mean? Maybe you're into wrestling, I don't know, but like we're absolutely living in a different world now than we were living in 2019. There's just no bones about it. There's no two ways about it here. We're living in a different world now than we were at that point. And so this world can be aptly described by the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in air signs. I've spoken at length about this. So there's this new thing that's going on here, right? And it's new, so we don't necessarily know how it works or how to make it work or how to get the things that we actually want out of this new paradigmatic reality, right? So Uranus, on the other side of things, has been showing much disruption. Markets are in flux. The way that we actually get to the Taurus values, the Taurus things are the things that like feel good in your body. We can think about artistic stuff. We can think about creative stuff. We can think about any of the sort of like creature comforts and this sort of stuff. This is all of that stuff has been in flux. We're living in a new reality. So all getting to shelter and food and hugs and these kinds of things, this has been deeply disrupted, right? And Uranus has described that disruption, the sort of up and down, the roller coastery vibes of that whole situation. Now, it's important to remember that Taurus is a sign that is ruled by Venus. So Venus is a planet that is between us and the sun, right? And so it is between the Earth and the sun. And so that means that it's going to move quickly. Venus and Mercury and the sun all go around the about one time a year, right? So with this in mind, then Venus spends most of the rest of the year away from this area, right? Not in domicile, just kind of doing other stuff, making aspect to it or like seeing what's going on. But now Venus is at home in Taurus. Venus in Taurus, especially last week, was a real good time to think with the things that you really like and the desires that you really have, and sort of sit with that and be with that. There might have been something extra delicious to pay attention to. I recommended a couple of people that asked me for elections, and on the first I recommended that people go out and do things or this kind of stuff. There was like some nice harmonious dynamics there, right? Venus in Taurus loves harmony. And then now this week we've got Venus catching up to Uranus, and then from there it's all Uranus, North Node, Saturn for the rest of Venus's time, and a trine to Pluto in Capricorn to boot for the rest of Venus's time in Taurus. And so it's not going to be easy going like, I luxuriate on the couch and it feels so wonderful, the way that we like to think about the Empress Venus in Taurus, like having that kind of life. Rather, we're going to be looking at Venus rules Taurus, is in charge here. Venus is the queen of this castle, as it were. And Uranus is in here, acting a fool, right? Running amok. Shit's wild out here. And so this to me looks like a really good time to see about what's really real out here. Like, what do I really want? I know I talk about that every week, and part of that is because that question is inexhaustible, right? You can always look deeper into that question. But second here, whenever we think about Uranus, we might be, if you engage that question deeply and honestly, something like the journal might be really important here. Even discussing this kind of thing out loud with loved ones, deeply loved ones, like your mom or your partner or something like this. Those folks still have an idea of who they think you are and who they want you to be and stuff like that. So working this out on your own in a journal or something like that, where there's no judgment, where there's no, like you can judge yourself, don't. But the pages aren't going to judge you. The pages don't want you to be a better Christian or something like this. You know what I mean? Like you can just think what you need to think, and if it's weird, if it's ugly, if it's if it maybe makes you uncomfortable. Oh, why do I want this thing that is so ethically ambiguous? Or why do I want this thing that I know is harmful to other people, but it feels so good to me? Why do I want this thing that I know is harmful for me, right? All this sort of stuff. You can, in this space of the journal or aloneness or whatever it is, meditation, breathing exercises, I love me a good breathing exercise. In this kind of space, you can have that kind of honesty. You can be real about that. And with this Uranus, you might be surprised. You might be surprised about wanting, liking, desiring, attracting things that are unexpected, that you might not have thought were possible, or that you want or would want to want, or this kind of thing, right? This is a really good time to look deeply into that and really think deeply about that, because as Uranus is not in charge here. Uranus is both under an overcoming square from Saturn. So Saturn in Aquarius is in the overcoming position and is therefore likely to win any struggles that come from Uranus, right? That doesn't mean that Saturn doesn't take damage or that Saturn has an easy time of things, but it does mean that Saturn is likely to come out on top. So Uranus is not in position to win there. Also, Uranus does not rule Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. And so to see Venus coming through here gives us the sense that Uranus has been running amok. It's been wild out here. And Venus is now here to be like, okay, so what are we really gonna do with this? What are we really noticing about this? There's something really deeply truthful or honest. That's one of the things that I really like about the Scorpio-Taurus axis, is that there's a visceral quality to it that cannot be faked. You know what I mean? No one's faking Taurus and Scorpio stuff. If you love cake, then there's a cake in front of you, you're gonna be like, right? And people who don't actually love the cake are simply not going to react that way, right? So there's an honesty to this whole axis. Scorpio and Taurus are pretty honest about things. There's a visceral body reaction a lot of times. And so to see Uranus making markets crazy, or having to deal with instability in some kind of way. We're thinking about Taurus as like creature comforts and things like this. Maybe there hasn't been access to creature comforts in some kind of way. Maybe, supply chain disruptions or whatever it is. I know a lot of people are dealing with housing struggles right now, this kind of thing, right? So what is kind of where it goes with it, right? So I really love this creature comfort, but I don't have access to it anymore. What is it that I'm actually looking for when I want this thing? I love pretzels, but I can't find my favorite pretzels anymore. So what am I actually looking for here? Am I looking for a snack? Am I looking for, and if so, then will any snack do? Can I replace it with oranges? Are they the same thing? And if not, then why not? Maybe I'm looking for comfort, creature comfort, right? Maybe maybe my heart feels some kind of way, and really what I want is the feeling, I just want a delicious mouth feeling to make me not think about how lonely I am, or something like this, right? So looking deeper underneath these desires, because whatever in 2019 you might have been used to doing may not be available anymore. And so, or maybe coming toward unavailability, or maybe that thing, which is still available, isn't lighting your fire anymore. What does that mean? What is this like? Because not only has the world changed, but I am the world also. So are you. We don't live on the earth. We are the earth. And so if we live in a world that is different, then that means that we too are different. And so this is a really good time. When I think about Venus and Taurus, and Uranus, and there's the square to Saturn and everything. So when we think about Venus square Saturn, which is going to be next week, so we're going to really see the sort of infrastructural component show up next week. But whenever I think about Venus Saturn, people really don't, people are kind of mean to Venus Saturn sometimes, because it doesn't feel as good, it doesn't taste as good as you want the Venus to. But when you see the Saturn there's endurance and longevity, there's something about, okay, if we generate some parameters and some reasonable expectations, then we can actually get toward the meat space, actual lived reality of the thing that I want. I can have a piece of it because I put some limitations on some things, right? And so Venus Saturn can actually be very, very useful. Contracts can show up here and be beneficial, these kinds of things. So there's this component here as well, right? But this week, before we really get into trying to legislate about it or whatever it is, in your own life, then it can be a really good time to look deeply and honestly at one's own desires, especially in this historical moment. And with that Uranus, don't be afraid to think outside the box. Don't be afraid to think the thoughts that you are not allowed to think. We are living in a historical moment where it's very difficult to think thoughts that are outside the narrative. This is part of the reason why I encourage privacy for this kind of thing. Or you can get a reading with me. I do this in readings all the time, and I do what I can to be affirming of wherever you are in your place, because this is such an important and delicate thing to take care of, to be aware of, because really what I've been thinking about with Uranus and Taurus this whole time is the lighthouse. How can we, shit's really weird right now. There's obstacles, there's all these, it's probably not gonna be a straight line to my goal. But if I know where it is, then I can navigate around obstacles and keep an idea of my direction. So that's what's on offer for us today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for chilling with me. Thank you for sending me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. Thank you for being with me and all. Thank you for joining the Patreon and getting the election report. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll see y'all next time.